There comes a moment in every life, in every calling, and in every divine journey when the voice of God speaks not in a whisper, but in a thunder. Come out of Egypt. Egypt, yes, not just a land of pyramids and pharaohs, but a spiritual realm. A symbol, a shadow, a stronghold of bondage, and today I tell you by the Spirit of the Lord, it's time to leave, because Egypt is not your destiny, because Egypt is not your promise, because Egypt is not your home. The same God who parted seas is the same God who's calling you out. You were not created to live in chains. From the very beginning, when God formed man from the dust and breathed into him the breath of life, he did not design him for bondage. He made him to walk with him in the cool of the day, free, unashamed, unafraid. But Egypt twists that design. Egypt makes you believe that slavery is normal, that your chains are permanent, that your value is based on how many bricks you make. Egypt will train you to call captivity home. But I tell you this, bondage is not your birthright, slavery is not your portion, oppression is not your inheritance. You were not born again to live under the same curses you were delivered from. You were not redeemed by the blood of the Lamb to live like you're still under Pharaoh's whip. Every time you tolerate the lies of the enemy, every time you settle for less than what God promised, you are standing on land he never called you to dwell in. Pharaoh didn't give you your name. God did. Pharaoh didn't write your destiny. God did, and Pharaoh doesn't own your soul. Jesus paid for it in full. You must begin to see bondage as illegal, as foreign, as unholy. You must get holy anger against every chain you've normalized, because what you tolerate you empower, and what you excuse you allow to grow. But heaven is not silent over your slavery. God sees every tear cried in secret. He hears the groans that no one else hears. He remembers his covenant, and when God remembers his covenant, he moves. He's the God who breaks yokes. He's the God who smashes shackles. He's the God who sends plagues into Pharaoh's camp just to get his beloved back. You were made for liberty. You were formed for intimacy. You were anointed to walk in dominion. And as long as you remain in Egypt, you live beneath your calling. So today, lift your head, shake off the dust. Reject the voice of the taskmaster, and declare it with fire in your bones. I was not born for bondage. I was born for glory. The promise of God is never found behind you. It is always set before you. Yet Egypt whispers the lie that the past is safer than the unknown. It tells you that the chains you've grown familiar with are more secure than the wilderness that leads to your destiny. But listen, you cannot possess the promise while holding onto the past. Egypt may have fed you, but it also enslaved you. Egypt may have given you structure, but it robbed you of your identity. It may have seemed comfortable, but comfort in captivity is still captivity. You cannot look back and move forward at the same time. You cannot reach the land of milk and honey while longing for garlic and leeks. The Israelites had seen the power of God, plagues, miracles, the Red Sea split wide open. But still, when things got hard in the wilderness, they said, "Let us go back to Egypt." That's the spirit of compromise. That's the temptation of the flesh to go back to what you were delivered from, because it's familiar. But God didn't bring you out just to bring you back. The past may be known, but the promise is divine. It's supernatural, it's forward. Lot's wife looked back and became a pillar of salt. Why? Because when your heart belongs to a place God has called you out of, you become frozen, paralyzed, unable to move into the future. God is not in your rearview mirror. He's ahead of you, calling you forward. He says, "Behold, I do a new thing. Do you not perceive it?" Your calling is not in yesterday. Your healing is not in yesterday. Your purpose is not in yesterday. Stop mourning the Egypt God delivered you from. Stop grieving over what you had to lose to be free. If it kept you from the promise, it was never meant to stay. The promised land may require faith. It may require a journey through the wilderness. It may ask you to fight giants, but it's there, just ahead, and it's filled with fruit you didn't plant, wells you didn't dig, and houses you didn't build. Don't settle for memories when God is offering you miracles. Don't dwell on yesterday's captivity when the God of today is calling you into inheritance. The promise is never in the past. It's in your obedience to walk forward, even when the road is uncertain, because the one who promised is already waiting at the finish line. You cannot worship in bondage, because true worship requires freedom. Not just the freedom to lift your hands, but the freedom of your heart, your soul, your spirit. Worship is not just a song. It's not a melody. It's not a ritual. Worship is surrender. Worship is communion. Worship is intimacy with the living God, and Egypt will do everything it can to break that intimacy. That's why Pharaoh feared worship. He didn't fear Israel's strength or their numbers. He feared their worship. Because worship connects you to the God who breaks chains. Worship ignites the fire that reminds you who you are. Worship releases the presence of the one who overthrows empires and topples thrones. And that's why Pharaoh said, "You can go, but don't go too far. Go, but leave your children. Go, but leave your cattle. Compromise, delay half measures, because if Pharaoh can't stop your worship, he'll try to dilute it." But Moses declared the heart of heaven, "We will not leave one hoof behind," because you can't worship in bondage, and you can't worship halfway. Egypt wants to keep your hands busy so they can't be lifted. Egypt wants to fill your ears with lies so you can't hear his voice. Egypt wants to weigh your soul down with guilt, shame, addiction, and cycles, so you believe you're unworthy to come before the altar. But I tell you, the blood of the Lamb has made a way through every wall that once stood between you and God. Worship is your liberation song. It is your battle cry. It is the echo of heaven's authority flowing through your breath. And when you begin to worship, even in the wilderness, even in the place between your deliverance and your destiny, walls start to shake, chains begin to crack, because the enemy knows a worshiper cannot be controlled. You see, Egypt is not just a place, it's a system, a spiritual regime that seeks to dominate your identity, silence your praise, and bury your hunger. That's why God didn't just say, "Let my people go." He said, "Let my people go, that they may worship me in the wilderness." Because the wilderness isn't the end, it's the beginning of intimacy. It's the place where idols die and only the presence of God remains. It's the place where no one is watching but heaven, and your song becomes a weapon. You weren't created to perform for Pharaoh. You were created to stand before the throne of the Most High. You weren't made for the brick pits of man's approval. You were made to carry the incense of praise before the Lord of hosts. So if Egypt still has your worship, Egypt still has your heart. But if God has your worship, then he has your freedom. And Pharaoh has no claim. Break the chains, lift the song, come out of Egypt, and worship in spirit and in truth. Delay can be deadly, not just to your destiny, but to your soul. Every moment you remain in Egypt after God has called you out is a moment of spiritual risk. When God says move, it's not a suggestion. It's a divine summons, a heavenly alarm, a call to break camp and walk forward. But delay makes you deaf to that call. It makes your feet heavy. It teaches your heart to settle for survival when you were called to walk in victory. Pharaoh didn't mind Israel staying close, as long as they didn't leave, and that's exactly what the enemy wants from you. Delay. Just one more day of compromise. Just one more night with the sin you said you'd let go of. Just one more season in comfort, but what you call delay, hell calls permission. Because the longer you stay, the more Pharaoh strengthens his grip. The enemy knows that indecision is still disobedience. You may not have said yes to him, but if you haven't said yes to God, you're still stuck in Egypt. The delay you excuse is the doorway the enemy uses to keep you bound. That tomorrow spirit is a trap. Pharaoh told Moses, "I'll let you go tomorrow." But God says today, "If you hear my voice, harden not your heart." Delay is deceptive. It whispers you're not ready. It masks itself as wisdom, but what it really does is blind you to the urgency of obedience. It steals your fire, it cools your zeal, it trains you to live with the chains rather than walk out of them. But you were not made to adjust to Egypt. You were called to flee from it. Consider what delay cost Israel. What could have taken 11 days took 40 years. Some died in the wilderness not because God failed them, but because they delayed in trusting Him. They hesitated, they doubted, they clung to Egypt in their hearts even after they walked out with their feet. And that hesitation became a grave. Delayed obedience is still disobedience. And the longer you linger in Egypt, the more you begin to forget how bitter it really was. The more you remember the false comforts, the more you forget the pain of slavery. But God didn't send the plagues, split the sea, and speak from the mountain just to see you stay stuck. This is the hour to move, not next year, not after you feel ready, not when it's easier, now. Because when heaven opens the door, you must walk through before it shuts. When the cloud lifts, the tent must move. The delay of a single day can turn destiny into regret. So run from Egypt with urgency in your steps and fire in your eyes. Burn the bridges behind you. Refuse to look back. Because every second you delay is a second Pharaoh schemes, and your wilderness waits, and your promise remains unclaimed. Freedom is not for the hesitant. It's for the bold who obey immediately. Egypt will not let you go without a fight. When God calls you out, Egypt doesn't simply wave goodbye. It rises up in rage. Pharaoh will mount his chariots, summon his armies, and chase you with everything he's got, because bondage hates losing its grip. Darkness doesn't release its captives quietly. Egypt will pursue you, not because you're weak, but because you're free, and freedom terrifies Pharaoh. You may have walked out of the gates, but the enemy will try to convince you that your past still owns you, that your addiction still has a claim, that your shame still speaks louder than grace, that the voices of your failure, your trauma, your brokenness can catch up to you. But hear this, just because Egypt is chasing you doesn't mean it can catch you. The Red Sea wasn't just a path of escape, it was a trap for your enemy. The Israelites saw the dust rising behind them, heard the rumble of horses and the war cries of Pharaoh's best. Fear gripped them. But God wasn't alarmed. He had already written the ending. Egypt was on borrowed breath. Pharaoh's rage was the last act of a defeated empire. God led his people into a dead end on purpose, not to destroy them, but to destroy what pursued them. So don't panic when the past starts chasing you. Don't run back when the old temptations come knocking. Don't retreat when the enemy reminds you of who you used to be, because the same God who led you out will fight for you. He does not lead his people halfway to freedom. What chases you into the waters will drown in the depths of God's deliverance. Egypt will come hard, but it won't come through. The waters that open for you will close on your enemies. The lies that haunted you, the ones that said you'll never change, you'll never be free, you'll always be broken, those lies are about to be buried under the sea of grace. The generational curses, the soul ties, the strongholds, they might chase you, but they cannot follow you into the promise. They may roar behind you, but they will fall silent in the presence of your deliverer. God is not only the God who saves, He is the God who finishes. He completes what He starts. He destroys what tried to destroy you. He drowns every voice that told you freedom wasn't real, so don't fear the pursuit. Let it chase you, let it come, because every step you take is a step deeper into God's protection, His promise, His purpose. And when you reach the other side, you will look back and see Egypt's chariots floating in the sea. Not one chain will survive, not one captor will rise again. Not one whisper of your past will pass through the waters of God's redemption. Egypt will chase you, but God will drown it, and all that will remain is your freedom, my friend. Leave Egypt, leave the lies, leave the shame, leave the fear, leave the past. You are not a slave, you are a son. A daughter, a royal priesthood, a chosen people. You were born for the promised land. You were redeemed by blood, not to die in bricks and straw, but to dwell in glory. So rise up, and walk out of Egypt. Because every step away from Egypt is a step toward the promise. Amen.